In today's video, we're talking about a very common offense in Arizona. It's called shoplifting. It's something that probably most people don't need a lot of explanation to understand, but the law is a little bit more nuanced than it may otherwise sound like. So most people think of shoplifting as somebody takes something from a store that they didn't pay for. Yeah, that's one way you can do it, but there are a lot of different other sub-elements to shoplifting that we need to cover in order to understand the components that are necessary to sustain a conviction. So let's take a look at the statute and dive into it. The statute is A.R.S. 13-1805, and this is a summary of the language that you'll find in there that defines what conduct constitutes shoplifting. And it's not just as simple as taking something out of a store. That's one way to do it, but there are other different elements that are required. A little bit about criminal law. So for a lot of criminal offenses, you need two components in order to have a valid crime. You need a component of a crime that constitutes a mental state. So what is a person thinking? What are they intending to do? That's part of their mental state. It really doesn't have anything to do with the conduct. That's the second part of a criminal offense. So you have what's called a mens rea and an actus reus. Mens rea means the mental state. The actus reus means the conduct. So what actual physicality, what activity, what conduct did a person do? For shoplifting, you require both. You require a mental state and an action, a conduct. So let's take a look at how that breaks down. So if you look at the statute 13-1805, you're going to see that a person, this part here is the mental state. A person, of course, must be in an establishment where merchandise is for sale, but then the person has to knowingly, so again, a person's mental state, they have to knowingly obtain the goods of another, and then they need to do that, they need to obtain those goods at the time with the intent to deprive that other person of those goods. So they have to knowingly come into possession of those goods. If somebody put something in your purse and you don't know about it, well, you don't know that it's there. And so your mental state is not there. You may have walked out of the store with that property in your purse, but you didn't know about it. So you didn't have the mental state to do that. Or if you thought that you had the goods or you had lawful possession of those goods or you had a right to take those goods, you didn't have the intent to deprive the other person of those goods. And so again, you do not have the mental state. But if they can show that you knew that you were obtaining the goods of another person with the intent to deprive them, those two things are going to satisfy the mental portion of the shoplifting statute. So you can see just by understanding those two elements, there may be some defenses there. If those two are valid, there's other conduct that needs to be tacked on top of those. So what conduct can constitute shoplifting? The first one is what most people will presume. It's removing an item without paying for it. So if you take an item off the shelf, you leave the store with it, you didn't pay for that item, that's going to constitute shoplifting. Another way you can get it is charging the cost of the goods to somebody else. So let's say you charge it to somebody else's room or you charge it to somebody else's account. I'm not talking about credit card fraud or any of those things, but you actually charge it to somebody else. You don't have the authority or the permission to do that. That's going to be considered shoplifting under the statutes. Also, if you pay less than the cost of the goods and you do so by using some sort of trickery, like if you manipulate the tags, if you put a sale sticker on there, if you are changing the UPC code from one item to another item. If you do something, it's called an artifice or trickery. If you're manipulating the price tags or those things, that's going to be considered shoplifting because you're paying less than the goods, less than the value of the goods as they would originally be. Another way that you can do it is if you're transferring one item from one container to another container, if you're concealing stuff in one container, if you're taking one low value camera out, you're putting in a high valued camera in that same container, and now you want to pay the low camera price for the more expensive camera. You've been manipulating that, you've been changing goods, changing the container of those goods. That's going to be considered shoplifting. And then of course concealment. So concealing an item, under your clothes or putting something into a purse or something like that. That's going to be concealing those goods with the intent to deprive somebody else of those goods. So those are really the 5 ways that you can get charged with shoplifting. So there are different ways that are above and beyond just walking out of a store with something you didn't pay for. Now, let's go back to the mental states. So some people will say, well, I didn't know that was in my purse, or I didn't know that was in my pocket, or I forgot the fact that I was wearing that under my clothes. there are a couple different ways that the law says that we can just satisfy this. So if you're going to be arguing about whether it was done knowingly or whether it was done with the intent to deprive somebody of those goods, the law says that if you do one of these two things, the law can presume that you've got a mental state. You've got clear intention that you are going to be satisfying these elements here just based on one of these two things. And so let's take a look at what those are. First and foremost, if you conceal an item on your person, so if you take some property and you conceal it on your person, you take that and you put it in your pocket, you put it under your clothes, you put it in a purse, it's something that's on you, they can go ahead and presume that you have the mental state to satisfy the elements under the statute. The other way that you can get it is if you use some sort of an artifice. An artifice means some other material, some other instrument, some other device, a bag, a container. Sometimes people will bring in a cutting device to cut off a electronic tag. Sometimes people will bring a separate bag that may be lined with aluminum foil or something to beat the RFID sensors, and they'll put it in the bag. So if you're using something that is going to facilitate the act of shoplifting, then the law can presume that you had the mental state. They don't need you to admit that you were trying to steal it. They don't need you to know about it, or they don't need to prove these elements. They can say just by you having that bag, or by you having those scissors, or by you doing something with some other instrument to facilitate the shoplifting, they can presume you had the mental state. So as you can see, shoplifting, it's a little bit more involved than some people might think. They just think that if you just take an item and walk out of the store with it, that's obviously shoplifting. That's really only one way to get it. It can happen in a number of ways, and the benefit is that from a defense perspective, there are a lot of arguments to be made. What actually constitutes knowingly, what actually is indications that there was intent to deprive somebody of something. If you can beat the mental state of this case, the statute cannot be met. Without a mental state, just this action is not enough to convict somebody. And same down here, there may be other alternative explanations for the conduct. It wasn't necessarily concealment, or you thought charging somebody else's account was actually a mistake. It wasn't done with the intent to deprive. So there's a lot of arguments to be made. Shoplifting is very common. There's a lot that we can do to help people through these cases. Just because you've been charged with it, no matter how bad the case may seem, doesn't mean that you're going to have to walk away with a shoplifting conviction. Shoplifting convictions are not necessarily good. Other employers, people doing background checks, they tend to have problems with shoplifting because they believe, whether it's true or not, that there's some dishonesty going on, that there's manipulation there. So you want to make sure that if you've been charged with shoplifting, you meet with a very dedicated legal team, people with a lot of experience to help you through it. That's us. We help a lot of people with these cases, practice all over Arizona. We offer free case evaluations, so we're happy to have you come in, sit down. We'll talk about the specifics of your case. Make sure you have a good plan for moving forward so that you don't end up with this on your record. Give us a call. We look forward to speaking with you. Thanks for watching.